Chapter 25, Echoes of the Trial, Part 3. The council chambers of Brumkorath were as imposing as they were cold. Carved into the heart of the mountain, the room seemed to hum with the weight of centuries of decisions, its towering columns and intricate stonework reminders of the dwarves' storied history. Lucas, Mina, and Thomas stood before a crescent table of elder dwarves, their expressions as unreadable as the rock around them. The air was thick with tension, the kind that only worsened when the stakes were life and death. Kingston's message had arrived the day before, carried by a grim-faced envoy who wasted no time delivering the demand. The World Police wanted the party extradited, citing concerns over their involvement with the Sent Ones and the chaos surrounding the cult's activities. To Mina, it felt like a noose tightening. To Thomas, it was an insult to everything they'd endured to protect the city. For Lucas, it was another obstacle in a journey already fraught with peril. "We appreciate the urgency of your investigation," said Elder Thranor Blackstone, his gravelly voice echoing in the chamber, "but our position is not one to be dictated by outsiders." The statement wasn't directed at the party, but at the World Police representative seated to the side, a human woman with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She had introduced herself simply as Officer Denka. "We're not here to dictate," Denka replied smoothly, though the edge in her tone suggested otherwise. "But the actions of these individuals," she gestured toward Lucas and the others, "have drawn the attention of global authorities. Their involvement with the Sent Ones and the aftermath of Goldar's trial cannot be ignored. They must answer for what's happened." "They have answered," Thranor said firmly. "They aided us in rooting out Goldar's corruption and preventing his faction from tearing this city apart. They are under our jurisdiction." "Until when?" Denka shot back. "The world is watching, and you can't shield them forever. Brumkorath's sovereignty won't protect them if they've acted against the broader interests of Hybris." Lucas felt Mina stiffen beside him, her hand gripping her side where her wounds still ached. Thomas stepped forward before she could respond, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We're not hiding," he said. "We've been here, fighting to protect your city, your people. If it weren't for us, Goldar's forces would still be wreaking havoc. So if you're looking for someone to blame, maybe start with the people who let it get this far in the first place." The room fell silent. The dwarves exchanged glances, some nodding subtly, others frowning. Denka's eyes narrowed, but she didn't immediately respond. Thranor leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Enough. The decision of this council is clear. The accused will remain under our surveillance until our investigation into the Sent Ones is complete. We will not hand them over to outside forces until we have determined their role in the events within our city." Denka's lips thinned, but she didn't argue further. She stood, smoothing her uniform with an air of practiced restraint. "I'll relay your decision to my superiors. But make no mistake, this isn't over." With that, she turned and left the chamber, her boots echoing on the stone floor. The tension in the room eased slightly, though Lucas could feel the weight of the council's scrutiny still bearing down on them. Thranor's gaze shifted to Wallace, who stood slightly apart from the group. The older man's expression was as composed as ever, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Sir Wallace," Thranor began, "we have agreed to your request to return to the World Police as a representative of this group. You will carry with you a report of the events here, as well as assurances that the investigation is ongoing. However, the others will remain in Brumkorath until further notice." Wallace inclined his head, his voice steady. "I understand, and I thank the Council for its consideration, but I trust you will ensure their safety during their stay." Thranor nodded. "That is our responsibility." The meeting adjourned shortly after, though the unease lingered as the party followed Wallace back to their quarters. The stone corridors of Brumkorath felt more oppressive than usual, the shadows deeper, the air colder. When they finally reached their room, Wallace turned to face them, his expression unusually grave. "I don't like this any more than you do," he said, his voice low. "But we have to be strategic. If I can buy you time with the World Police, it might give you a chance to finish what you started here." "You're leaving us to deal with this alone?" Mina asked, her tone sharper than she intended. The pain from her wounds was making her irritable, but the thought of losing Wallace's steady presence was enough to make her stomach turn. Wallace's expression softened. "You're not alone, Mina. You have each other. And you have allies here, even if they're hard to see right now. I'll do what I can to keep the pressure off, but you need to focus on the task at hand. The Unbound are still out there, and they won't wait for politics to play out." Lucas nodded, his jaw tight. "We'll manage." Wallace hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "Stay vigilant. And remember, your actions here will define how the world sees you moving forward. Don't let them twist your story." With that, he turned and left, leaving the party in a heavy silence. Mina sank onto the cot by the hearth, her hand resting over her bandages. Thomas paced, his boots scuffing against the stone floor, while Lucas leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "This isn't sustainable," Thomas muttered. "We can't just sit here while the council decides our fate." "We won't," Lucas said quietly, his voice firm. "But for now, we need to play their game. Stay close, stay quiet, and figure out what's really happening with the Sent Ones and the Unbound." Mina looked up at him, her expression weary but determined. "And if they try to hand us over?" "They won't," Lucas said, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "We've come too far to let that happen now." The fire crackled in the hearth, its warmth doing little to dispel the chill that settled over the room. For now, all they could do was wait, and prepare for whatever came next. The corridors of Brumkorath were quieter than usual, the echo of footsteps lost in the oppressive stillness that had settled over the city since the trial. Lucas walked alongside Mina and Thomas, their path winding through dimly lit halls carved deep into the mountain. The weight of their predicament hung heavy over them, as did the faint ache of exhaustion that no amount of rest seemed able to shake. Mina leaned slightly on Lucas as they walked, her injuries still healing. Though the dwarven medics had done their best, the battle with the disciple had left wounds that went deeper than the skin. Her ribs were bound tightly under her tunic, and every step sent a dull throb through her body. Despite the discomfort, she forced herself to keep moving. Anything was better than being confined to their room, where the air felt stifling and the weight of their situation unbearable. "I still can't believe Wallace agreed to leave us here," Thomas muttered, breaking the silence. His tone was sharp, his frustration barely concealed. "We're sitting ducks. If the Empire sends someone else, or something else, we won't stand a chance." Mina glanced at him, her expression tired but measured. "Wallace didn't abandon us. He's buying us time. You know he wouldn't leave unless he thought it was the best option." "Maybe." Thomas stopped walking, his fists clenched at his sides. "But that doesn't change the fact that we're stuck here. We can't fight the Empire, the Unbound, and the World Police all at once." "We don't have to fight all of them," Lucas said quietly, his voice calm but edged with a hint of steel. He turned to face them, his eyes shadowed by an intensity that hadn't been there before. "This isn't the Unbound. It doesn't feel like them. What's happening here? It's bigger. The disciple wasn't acting alone." Thomas frowned. "What are you saying? The disciple's dead. You're not suggesting—" "No," Lucas cut in. "Not him. He's gone. But the Empire sent him for a reason, and it wasn't just to kill us. There's something else at play here. The prophecy, it's happening right in front of us, and we're too tangled up in politics to see it clearly." Mina's brow furrowed as she considered his words. "You think the Empire sent the disciple because of the prophecy?" Lucas nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "The Sent Ones, the Unbound, Brumkorath, all of it ties back to the prophecy. The artifacts, the temple. The Empire knows more than they're letting on, and if the disciple was just the beginning, we're running out of time to figure out their endgame." Thomas sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "So what do we do? Wait for the council to decide we're useful enough to keep alive? Or hope the Empire doesn't send another disciple while we're stuck here?" "We prepare," Lucas said firmly. "We can't afford to waste any more time. The Sent Ones are fractured, but we still have allies among them. We need to find out what they know about the prophecy and about the artifacts." "And the dwarves?" Mina asked, her voice soft. "They're watching us like hawks. If we step out of line—" "We won't," Lucas assured her. "But we have to push the boundaries. The council's decision bought us some time, but that's all it is. Time. If the Empire is involved, we need to act before they make their next move." Mina nodded reluctantly, though the weight of his words made her stomach churn. The thought of another disciple, or worse, arriving in Brumkorath was almost too much to bear. She could still feel the phantom pain of her wounds, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. The trio continued down the corridor, their path leading to one of the smaller communal halls where the remaining members of the Sent Ones had been gathering. Though the cult was a shadow of what it had been under Goldar's leadership, those who remained were clinging to their faith with desperate determination. Lucas had hoped to find answers among them, but so far their efforts had yielded little more than fragmented whispers and half-truths. As they entered the hall, the murmurs of conversation died down, and all eyes turned to them. The tension in the room was palpable, a mixture of awe and wariness. The cultist still viewed Lucas with a strange reverence, though it was tempered by the suspicion that came with his role in Goldar's downfall. "Lucas." A familiar voice broke the silence, and Dira stepped forward, her expression guarded but earnest. Her presence was a steadying force amid the uncertainty, though Lucas couldn't ignore the exhaustion etched into her features. She had taken on the impossible task of holding the cult together, and it was clearly taking its toll. "We weren't expecting you," she said, her gaze flicking between the three of them. "Is something wrong?" "Not yet," Lucas replied, his tone measured. "But we need to talk about the prophecy." Dira's expression tightened, and she gestured for them to follow her to a quieter corner of the hall. Once they were out of earshot, she crossed her arms and looked at Lucas with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," Lucas said. "The prophecy, the artifacts, the temple, anything that might explain why the Empire is so interested in Brumkorath. The disciple didn't come here by chance, and I don't think he was working alone." Dira hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. "The prophecy is complicated. It speaks of a great upheaval, of ancient powers rising to shape the fate of Hybris. The Sent Ones believed it was their duty to guide that change, but we don't know the full extent of what it means. Goldar kept much of the knowledge to himself." "And the artifacts?" Mina pressed. "What are they? Why are they so important?" Dira shook her head. "We only know fragments. The artifacts are said to hold immense power, tied to the Sent One's origins. Goldar believed they were the key to fulfilling the prophecy, but he never told us where to find them, or what they would do once they were united." Lucas exchanged a glance with Mina and Thomas, his mind racing. If the artifacts were as powerful as the Sent Ones believed, it made sense that the Empire would want them. But what role did the temple play? And why did it feel like the answers were slipping further out of reach with every passing moment? "Then we'll have to find out for ourselves," Lucas said, his voice resolute. "Whatever Goldar was hiding, we'll uncover it, and we'll do it before the Empire beats us to it." Dira studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you, whatever it takes." As the group began to plan their next move, the weight of their mission settled over them once more. The wounds they carried, both visible and invisible, were far from healed, but there was no time to dwell on the pain. The future of Brumkorath, and perhaps all of Hybris, hung in the balance, and they couldn't afford to falter now. The air in the council chamber was thick with unspoken tension, the stone walls of the Sent One's headquarters echoing with the soft murmurs of those gathered. Unlike the judgment halls of Brumkorath, which were filled with the weight of the law, the atmosphere here was one of guarded reverence and quiet authority. The council of the Sent Ones had convened in the heart of their crumbling order, the remnants of their once powerful influence now reduced to whispers and shadows. Lucas, Mina, and Thomas stood together at the far end of the room, flanked by Dira. The four of them had been allowed entry under strict surveillance, but it was clear that the council was not here to pass judgment on the party. The cult's leadership had no interest in scapegoating them for the disaster that had befallen Goldar's reign. The Sent Ones were not so quick to cast blame. Their beliefs ran deeper than such petty concerns. "Your return was expected," Tolgar said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his age and wisdom. He was the most senior of the council members, though his once commanding presence had been dimmed by years of loss. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, swept over the group, though his gaze lingered on Lucas for a moment longer than the others. The prophecy was the heart of the Sent Ones, and it was clear that Lucas was more than just an outsider to them now. "We are grateful for your aid during the trial," Tolgar continued, his voice rising slightly to address the council, most of whom had remained silent so far. "But now our priority must be to rebuild what was lost. The disciple was but one link in a chain of events that we can no longer ignore." Lucas nodded in agreement. The weight of his words hung in the air, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the situation. The Sent Ones, fragile as they were not without their purpose. The prophecy they clung to was more than just a belief. It was their guiding force, their reason for existence. Lucas could see that it wasn't just about the prophecy anymore. It was about survival. "We are not here to cause further disruption," Lucas said, his voice firm, though tinged with the wariness of their journey. "We know that the prophecy is at the center of what's happening in Brumkorath, and we need to understand it. The Empire has taken notice, and if we don't act, there will be nothing left to rebuild." Tolgar's gaze softened, though there was no mistaking the concern in his eyes. "We are aware, Lucas. The Empire's hand is long, but we will not bend to them. Not now. Not after all we've endured." He paused, letting the words settle before continuing. "But we must be cautious. We are vulnerable, as you can see. The trials have left us with fewer allies, and the world beyond our walls does not care for our beliefs. The World Police demands accountability, and they will not rest until their questions are answered." Mina's eyes flicked to the window, where the shadows of the city stretched long under the fading light of day. She was quiet, her mind working through the implications of what had just been said. The World Police were pressing for answers, and the dwarves had agreed to monitor them until the investigation was complete. Wallace had been sent back, but the rest of them were here, under the watchful eye of the council and the city guards. "So, what are we to do?" Thomas asked, his voice sharp, almost desperate. "We're under surveillance, and for what? To be handed over to the World Police the moment they decide we're a threat?" Tolgar's expression remained calm, though there was a flicker of something deeper in his eyes. "You are not a threat to us, Thomas," he said with quiet assurance. "But we must proceed carefully. The Empire has shown that it will go to any lengths to achieve its goals, and we cannot afford to draw unwanted attention. You will remain here under our watch, but that does not mean you are prisoners." "Then we need to act," Lucas said, his tone more insistent now. "We don't have time to wait for the Council's approval on every move. The prophecy is unfolding, and I don't think we can stop it. But we can control how it plays out." Tolgar nodded, understanding the urgency in Lucas's words. "We will help you," he said, "but we cannot ignore the truth of our position. The Sent Ones are scattered, and our influence has waned. If we are to make a stand, it must be a careful one." Dira stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "We have allies, Tolgar," she said, her eyes flashing with determination. "There are those who still believe, those who have hidden themselves, waiting for the right moment. If the prophecy is truly unfolding, then it's time to gather them." Tolgar regarded Dira with a mixture of respect and wariness. "You speak of rebels and outcasts," he said slowly. "They are not part of the Order. We cannot simply rally those who have abandoned the path." "They haven't abandoned the path," Dira shot back. "They've been waiting for the right moment, and that moment is now." There was a long silence as the council members exchanged looks, the weight of Dira's words settling over the room. Lucas could see the internal struggle in Tolgar's eyes, the conflict between his desire to maintain order and the growing realization that the old ways were no longer enough to face the challenges ahead. "Perhaps," Tolgar said after a long pause, his voice resigned, "we will have to walk a different path. The council will deliberate on the best course of action, but we will not abandon you." Mina let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The fragile alliances they were forging were necessary, but there was a bitter taste to the compromises they were being asked to make. They had no choice but to walk this precarious line between the Sent One's fractured faith, the ever-watchful eyes of the dwarves, and the looming threat of the Empire. As the meeting came to an end, Lucas felt a surge of both determination and dread. The council had agreed to help, but the true battle was still ahead of them. And with every passing day, the walls around them were closing in, not just from the world police or the Empire, but from the very prophecy that seemed to be shaping their every move. "Let's prepare," Lucas said, his voice firm. "We don't have the luxury of waiting." The others nodded in agreement, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. They were allies for now, but even that alliance felt as fragile as the crumbling walls around them. And Lucas knew, deep in his gut, that the true test was yet to come.